Mr. Prabhakara, Mr. Suresh Babu, Mr. Satish, other office bearers present here, past and current, ladies and gentlemen, I wish you all Happy Engineers Day. Though September 15th is celebrated as Engineers Day throughout in India and a few other countries as well, Sri Lanka, Tanzania, and Yemen, Sir M.V. was much more than an engineer. No doubt, he started his career as an engineer in the Bombay Presidency, where he made a name for himself as an outstanding engineer. But during the course of his long working life, close to 8 decades, Sir M.V., as he was popularly called, distinguished himself not only as an engineer, but as an innovator, as an administrator, as an industrialist, as an economist, and above all, as a first-class statesman. During his 8 decades long working life, he held many important positions, served on very significant committees, and needless to say, during this long working life, he had to face many challenges, surmount many difficulties. And a study of his life, especially working life, does give us an insight into his management techniques, which I think are of considerable value to all of us. So today I would like to share a few of the management lessons I have learned from Sir M. Vishweshwaraya. I would like to share them with you. And I have allowed myself to be persuaded that the topic of my talk today is not altogether divorced from the theme of today's program. The first lesson I would like to share with you, what I learned from Sir M.V. was to be innovative. When faced with a crisis, we instinctively fall back on our accumulated knowledge and experience. But if we could only ignore ourselves for a moment and look at the world without any preconceptions, much the same way a child would look at the world, the wondrous world, the chances are that we stumble upon solutions whose effectiveness and simplicity might surprise us. During the last decades of the 19th century, around 1860, 1870, Lake Fifi was the only source of water for the city of Pune. It's now called Pune. As the city started growing, the storage capacity of Fifi Dam proved to be inadequate to meet the ever-growing water demand of the city, its cantonment, and also agriculture purposes. So, government felt the urgent need to increase the capacity of the dam. And government, Sir M.V. was then working there in the Pune region as a superintending engineer, and government asked him to come up with a solution to this problem. Initially, 2 suggestions came up. The first one was the obvious thing, to increase the height of the dam, and the second one was to build a check dam downstream to augment the storage capacity of the dam. But unfortunately, both these suggestions proved to be time-consuming and expensive. It is then Sir M.V. came up with the idea of automatic sluice gates. He invented them, installed them on the dam, and once it was installed, the storage capacity of the dam went up by 35%, and to a great extent it solved the problem of water shortage. These innovative sluice gates later found a mention in Burton Buckley's Irrigation Works of India, a definitive treatise on irrigation works in India even today. And subsequently, to increase the area of under irrigation, Sir M.V. came up with what he called block system of irrigation. The central idea of this system was to reduce the wastage of water. Farmers were recklessly using the water, wasting it, the way it's still happening today in Mandya region. And he came up with this detailed plan. The idea was to reduce the water consumption, the wastage mode, so that greater acreage came under cultivation. He prepared a detailed study and submitted it to Sir Colin C. Smith, who was the chairman of the first Irrigation Commission of India. Sir Smith was so impressed by this thorough paper prepared by Sir M.V., he made a special mention of it in the first irrigation report and strongly recommended this scheme to the government of Bombay. Later, the government of Bombay asked Sir M.V. to implement this scheme in the Pune region, and after it was implemented, both farmers and government benefited largely by this. Farmers by way of increased output, agriculture output, and government by way of increased revenue. This brings me to another lesson which we could learn from Sir M.V., to be persuasive. Somewhere down the road, we all, as administrators, as teachers, as businessmen, or whatever the capacity we work in, as parents, we wield our power to get things done. But really the wise among us don't wield the power, they use the power of persuasiveness and try to carry the people along. When Sir M. Vishweshwaraya wanted to implement the block system of irrigation, the farmers of the region, Pune region, were up in arms. They looked on it as some sort of interference on the part of government. And even Kesari, of which the great Balagangadhar Tilak was the editor-in-chief, strongly criticized this implementation as a needless interference from the government. Sir M.V. could have ignored all these protests and gone ahead with the implementation of the scheme, but he did not do that. He invited the farmers of the region to a meeting at the Pune Science College and explained the advantages of the block system of irrigation. Later, he invited Mr. Kelkar, who was a close associate of Balagangadhar Tilak, to lunch and explained the advantages of the system, the reasons behind that, and how it would immensely benefit the farmers who are right now protesting its implementation. Kelkar was convinced, and then he wrote a series of articles for Kesari explaining the advantages and advising the farmers to assist the government to implement this scheme. The scheme was successfully implemented, and this is what later one of the colleagues of Sir M.V. had to say about the scheme. He clearly said that Sir Mackenzie, who was a member of Bombay Assembly, he mentioned this in Bombay Assembly. I quote that, "The development of the system is due entirely to the genius of Mr. Vishweshwaraya, certainly one of the ablest officers, European or Indian, of the Public Works Department, with whom it has been my pleasure and honor to work." These are the words of Sir John Muir Mackenzie. The third lesson that we could perhaps get from Sir M.V. is not to accept anything less. See, so many times we all say, "Oh, I deserve something better." Why are we saying that we deserve something better? Obviously, we have accepted something we think we deserve when we still thought we deserve something more. See, in the year 1908, Hyderabad was devastated by floods, the like of which it had not seen before. The damage to life and property was so extensive that the Nizam of Hyderabad was greatly worried, and he wanted to secure the services of an eminent engineer to find a lasting solution to this problem. After much consultation and deliberation, the Nizam government decided to secure the services of Sir M.V. But by then Saramvi had resigned from the Bombay government and he was touring Europe to study its industries and economy. So when he received the cable from the Nizam of Hyderabad, Saramvi was in Milan, Italy. Saramvi agreed to accept this responsibility, but he made two things clear to Nizam. Firstly, he quoted a fee that was considered exorbitant even by European standards in those days. The second thing, he made it very clear to Nizam that he wouldn't come back immediately, he would come back only after concluding his study tour. Nizam accepted both these conditions and many eyebrows went up. The Bombay Gazette openly wondered, who is this Indian engineer who has the temerity to demand this, not only to demand this kind of high fee, but also to get it. Later, Saramvi spent several months in Hyderabad, prepared detailed report and submitted the report to the Nizam for implementation. Nizam later sent these reports to Mr. Roscoe Allen, who was a well-known civil engineer of the Madras Presidency, for his opinion, the second opinion. After thoroughly examining the schemes proposed by Vishweshwaraya, Allen wrote to Nizam thus, I am quoting, as to the design, they are, so far as I can see, what one might expect from the distinguished engineer who drew them up. I strongly advocate carrying the schemes recommended at once without any talking. Later, Nizam fully implemented Saramvi's scheme, and it is more than a decade since the scheme was implemented, and since then, Hyderabad hasn't been affected even once by floods. That is how thorough his scheme was. And the fourth lesson we could perhaps pick from Saramvi was self-esteem. Saramvi respected everybody alike, a child or a grown-up person, a pauper or a king. Anybody went to him. He was an embodiment of courtesy and dignity. And he expected the same treatment. He expected the same treatment from others as well. And especially if Indians were treated shabbily, Saramvi wouldn't tolerate it. At the specific request of the Maharaja of Mysore, Krishnaraj IV, one of the greatest kings the world has ever seen, Saramvi came to Mysore. First it was understood that he would come first as as chief secretary engineer, and later he would become the Diwan, and with full freedom to implement his schemes and ideas. After he joined service, the first Dasera, he received an invitation from the Maharaja of Mysore to the special Dasara Darbar, to which Maharaja would invite the top-ranking officers, both Indian and European. When Saramvi attended the function, he was a little upset to see European officers being seated on chairs and Indian officers sitting on the floor. Saramvi didn't say anything, but next year when he received the invitation from the Maharaja, Saramvi did not attend the function. It was rather unusual to decline the invitation from the Maharaja himself. Mirza Ismail, who was then the Huzur Secretary to His Highness, immediately contacted Sir M. Vishweshwaraya and asked him why he abstained from the Darbar. Sir M. V plainly told him that he did not care to attend any function where the Indians were treated shabbily. Mirza Ismail conveyed this to the Maharaja. To Maharaja's credit, it's also a testimony to his greatness. Krishnaraj Vadiyar understood and remedied the situation. From then on, both European and Indian officers were made to sit on chairs. And the next is leading from the front. This is a very interesting management lesson for anybody who is in business or who is an administrator. The Mysore Iron and Steel, or Bhadravati Works, as it was popularly called, the construction of which started after Vishweshwaraya resigned from the government of Mysore, went into deep trouble, even before the production could begin. The works, which were to have commenced production in 1919, went into production in 1923, a long delay of 5 years. The total cost of construction more than doubled to 211 lakhs from the original estimate of 94 lakhs. As the works went into production, other problems began to surface. The construction work, which was defective and incomplete, hindered the production. The retort to convert wood into charcoal stopped working. The chemical plant that was to process byproducts, a major source of income for the Bhadravati works, was not yet finished. Iron ore tunnel that was to convey iron ore to the furnace got flooded in the monsoon, and the American expert who was in charge of this ore tunnel suggested that the work should be closed down till the monsoon abated. In addition to these problems, a host of other issues such as corruption, apathy, incompetence on the part of the board of management, and the lack of leadership, war, recession greatly compounded these difficulties. In these circumstances, Saram Vishweshwaraya sent Diwan Banerjee, Albion Banerjee, to Pune where Vishweshwaraya was living, to request him, to persuade him to come and take over the management of Bhadravati works and to make it functional and turn it around. Vishweshwaraya accepted the challenge, subject to the condition that he should be given complete freedom to run the works. Once he accepted the responsibility, the first thing he did was to terminate the services of the Tata company, the managing agents responsible for the production and sale. He also terminated the services of the so-called foreign experts, whose expertise came at considerable cost, and appointed Indians to all those posts. He personally supervised the repair work to the ore tunnel and made it functional in 3 weeks flat. He reduced the whole operation into clearly defined functions and made supervisors answerable for the work of their respective divisions. He thus took 100% responsibility for turning the works around. The greatest change, however, came about in the attitude of the workers. Following Vishweshwaraya's example of working without any remuneration, workers and officers of the works willingly took cuts in their wages and salaries, and they began to function like one inspired team. They now realized that they were not working for a factory to earn a living. They were a team building a national industry. Soon, the works turned the corner, and it began exporting steel and other products to Europe, Japan, and America. Now, this leads me to the next lesson we could learn from Saramvi. As I just stated, Saramvi did not receive any remuneration for the work he did as the chairman of the Bhadravati works. But years later, when Jaichamarajendra Wadiyar became the king of Mysore, he bluntly told Saramvi that the state cannot accept the generosity of an individual, and Saramvi had better receive his remuneration. Saramvi then accepted the remuneration, but told Maharaja he would do so only if he was allowed to A. build an occupational center institute in Bangalore, and B. he is allowed to name the institution after Jaichamaraj Wadiyar. Jaichamaraj Wadiyar gracefully accepted these demands, and thus came the Jaichamarajendra Institute of Politics that stands almost next to the imposing Vidhan Sabha in Bangalore. This is the story how it came into existence. But the lesson for us here is, Saramvi had not forgotten that so many workers had voluntarily taken cuts in their wages, agreed for reduction without a murmur, because they thought that Saramvi was working without any remuneration. So Saramvi thought not the remuneration after so many years, it would amount to cheating those workers. So he gave it back to society. What he thought did not belong to him. May not be in a legal sense. Legally he was 100%, he deserved that money, but in a moral, ethical sense. And now I come to the farsightedness of that. We let the concerns of the moment influence our thinking so much that we refuse to see beyond the immediate. The few among us who can see further and try to prepare the rest of us for the things to come, therefore, are called visionaries. Vishweshwaraya was one such visionary, and I wish to give 2 examples in this regard. At a time when India barely had motorable roads, Vishweshwaraya thought of an automobile industry for India. He visited automobile factories in Torino, Italy's Fiat, and he went to London, met Lord Austin there, and then from there he went to travel to the USA, went to Detroit, had discussions with the representatives of Ford Company, then met Mr. Sorensen of Chrysler Corporation, later commissioned experts to draw up a scheme, feasibility report and a scheme for the establishment of an automobile factory for the Bombay province. It is interesting to note here all his foreign travels, including the trade delegations he led to Japan, USA, Europe. Sir M.V. spent money from his own pocket. Even when he went abroad to market the products of Bhadravati Iron and Steel, when he was the chairman, he did not take money from the government. For everything, he spent money from his pocket. It is interesting to note here. And later, after that report was prepared by the experts, he came back to Bombay, I'm sorry, it was called Bombay then, came back to Bombay and published the pamphlet, An Automobile Factory for the Bombay Province. Seth Walchand Hirachand evinced interest later in establishing an automobile factory in Bombay. And Sir M.V. immediately requested the Bombay government to depute a high-ranking government officer to assist Seth Walchand Hirachand to secure deal from the automobile manufacturers in the US. Mr. Advani was appointed and he made several trips, and finally he signed an agreement with Chrysler Corporation for the establishment of a factory, transfer of technology, and marketing the cars made in Bangalore and other British provinces here in the East. Thus, the first automobile factory, premier automobile factory, came into existence in India. Likewise, when bullock cart was the most popular mode of transport, perhaps the only mode of transport, Sir M.V. thought of the aviation industry because he keenly was aware of the economic significance of the aviation industry. He urged the government to establish more landing facilities for aircraft and to create training facilities for pilots and the ground staff. At that point of time, only two airlines were in operation, the Imperial Airlines and the Tata Airlines, and both were operating at a loss. Because of this, other entrepreneurs were not willing to invest their money in the aviation sector. To overcome this problem, Sir M.V. made a suggestion in his book, Planned Economy for India. I read that now. Unless night flying is arranged for, air transport will not attain its full value. The government can encourage private enterprise by paying subsidies or giving mail contracts at rates of payment which will enable the transport to be self-supporting. See, this had been Sir M.V.'s approach throughout. He did not want government to directly get into business. He always advocated policy initiatives that encouraged investment and made industries profitable and functional. And now this takes me to the next lesson we could possibly learn from Sir M.V., his intellectual integrity. So many times we all say things we don't mean just because we know that the powers that we like to hear us say that. Very few people speak their mind out. Sir M.V. was one of them. Sir M.V. and Nehru disagreed on a lot of economic things when it came to the economy of building the economy of India. After he became the Prime Minister, I'm afraid Nehru became a bit of an autocrat and he surrounded himself by yes men. And many great people exited Congress. Rajagopalachari, Rajaji as he was popularly known, Dr. Ambedkar, one of the outstanding thinkers India has seen, Jayaprakash Narayan, M.C. Chagla, to name a few. Nehru was a dyed-in-the-wool socialist. He was enamored of Soviet Russia and he was keen on socializing Indian economy. He invested heavily in industries, government directly, and he also began recklessly nationalizing profitable industries. insurance business was nationalized, aviation industry was nationalized, and so on. Sir M.V. kept telling Nehru, don't do that. It is not our business to get into business. Our business is to govern, to run, come up with policy initiatives that encourage investment and encourage entrepreneurship. But Nehru wouldn't listen to him. And on many occasions, Nehru and Sir M.V. clashed openly about these issues. Later on, when the Nehru government decided to confer Bharat Ratna on Sir M.V., Sir M.V. famously wrote to Nehru, by conferring the highest civilian honor on me, don't expect me to praise your government. I would continue to be your critic. Nehru was a thorough gentleman. He wrote back to Sir M.V. saying that Sir M.V.'s intellectual integrity was one of the many things taken into account before the government decided on conferring the Bharat Ratna on him, and he requested Sir M.V. to accept the award. And the next lesson perhaps we could draw is looking beyond the obvious. In 1952, when Sir M.V. was almost 92 years old, government of Bihar decided to build a bridge across the Ganga, and two places were chosen for that. And there was a division within the engineers of the Bihar government. One government wanted it at one spot, the second government wanted it in a different place. As the dispute could not be resolved, the government of Bihar referred it to the central government. And Nehru requested Sir M.V. to look into it and suggest a suitable place for the construction of the bridge. At the age of 92, Sir M.V. traveled all the way to Bihar, visited both places, surveyed the area on foot, and prepared detailed technical reports. And after all that, of course, he was satisfied with the designs that had been drawn up by the engineers. They all were competent engineers. After that, he met General Timaya to know the suitability of the location from the military or the strategic point of view. After consulting General Timaya, Sir M.V. recommended Mukheme as the ideal spot for the bridge. And now the bridge was later constructed at Mukheme. The bridge is still there. The bridge across the Ganga is at Mukheme. This is what I meant, just as an engineer, he was not blinkered, looking only at the technical details and such. He looked beyond the obvious, and he spoke to the army, he spoke to the strategic experts, and finally decided on the spot. Having said all this, in spite of all his persuasiveness and influence that he wielded, there are two occasions when Sir M.V. actually refused to bend. One was when he was the chairman of the Bombay Technical and Industrial Education Committee in 1921. The provincial government of Bombay presidency that came into existence following Montfort reforms in 1920 set up a committee under the chairmanship of Sir M.V. to make recommendations on the setting up of institutes of higher technical education. But Lord George Lloyd, who was the governor of Bombay province, was opposed to the establishment of institutions of higher technical education. He therefore advised Sir M.V. not to make any bold recommendations. Sir M.V. fully ignored Lord Joyce's recommendation, and after some interesting twists and turns, which I have discussed in my book, Chemical Institute of Bombay was established. Now there is an interesting aside. It is so interesting, I must tell you that story. Lord George Lloyd was a highly arrogant man. He had nothing but contempt for Indians and everything Indian. He was so pompous that when Prince of Wales visited Bombay soon after his marriage to Elizabeth, the Prince of Wales really remarked that he did not know what royalty meant until George treated him to it. He was so pompous. Later, this man got entangled in what came to be known as the Back Bay reclamation scam. See, India is a fertile ground for scams, even from those days. The idea was to reclaim a part of the bay by connecting the Malabar Hills and the Marina Bay along the Chaupati's hands. This reclaimed land is now a valuable piece of real estate in Mumbai. But when the work began, many allegations came to the fore. allegations of corruption against George Lloyd, who had treated Sir M.V. so shabbily. Nariman and other freedom fighters made this into a huge public issue. And finally, after several years, the government of India bowed to the public pressure and appointed a committee of inquiry under the chairmanship of Sir Grimwood Mears, who was then the Chief Justice of Allahabad High Court. It was a three-man committee. The second person was an European engineer, and the third person was Sir M.V., the only Indian to be on the committee. This committee held many sittings, interrogated many people, collected a lot of data, and then went to London, because by then George Lloyd had been transferred to Egypt as its governor. He was related to the king. And there George Lloyd was summoned. He was also interrogated. And finally, when the report came out, the British government particularly did not cover itself with glory. And the second instance was when Sir M.V. resigned from government because of the appointment of the Miller Committee. The British government was keen on reservations in appointment to government sector, but Sir M.V. was opposed to it. He was opposed to it not for any other reason. For Sir M.V. knew full well, and I can quote a dozen excerpts from his speeches and writings, he was not opposed to any particular community or caste. In one of his speeches he wrote, "In the end, much will depend on material prosperity. Nothing levels social position so effectively as economic success. If lower castes are given opportunities to amass wealth, the members of upper caste will serve under them, and the status of the lower caste will automatically improve." This is one of the excerpts from his speech. But then why did he oppose the reservation? And his opposition could be summed up in 3 points. The first, he thought the reservation will communalize the administration. The second system, that the reservation will eventually take away the initiative and confidence of the beneficiaries of the system. And the third reason, he cautioned Maharaja that it will become a vested interest. More and more people will begin to clamor for it. We have seen it today. Everybody wants the backward tack today. Perhaps this is the only country where everyone wants to be backward. M.V. suggested to the Maharaja that his government should bring about the upliftment of educationally backward communities by establishing more schools and colleges, and by awarding generous scholarships to the students of educationally backward communities. But the resident was adamant, and finally Maharaja was compelled to appoint the Miller Committee, and Sir M.V. resigned from the government service. Sir M.V. did everything in style. The day he resigned also, he summoned the staff of the secretariat, from the chief secretary down to the last person, told them that he was resigning, shook hands with all of them, sat in the official car, his private car followed him, headed out to Maharaja's palace, handed in his resignation, left the official car there, sat in his private car, and went to Muddenhalli. But fortunately, this did not affect the relationship between Maharaja and Sir M.V. in any way. Later, as I explained earlier, at Maharaja's request, Sir M.V. came back and took over the management of Bhadravati Iron and Steel, and also explained how he turned it around. And also the Kaveri West Bank Canal, which was an engineering marvel, which is an engineering marvel even by today's standards. Sir M.V. was advisor to the government of Maharaja. Ladies and gentlemen, perhaps we all think that Sir M.V. got everything easy. He was a genius, and he was also recognized by everybody, and he was so important. I think everything was easy for him, but I'm afraid nothing could be further from the truth. Sir M.V. had to encounter many enemies, and he had many detractors. I guess all great men have detractors. The number of detractors, in a way, perhaps decides the greatness of a person. When Margaret Thatcher started ushering in far-reaching economic reforms in the UK, she also made a lot of enemies. And one day, the Queen, Elizabeth, told her, "You are earning too many enemies, you had better little go slow." Then Margaret Thatcher famously quoted William Macy's poem to Queen. "You have no enemies, you say. Alas, my friend, the boast is poor. He has mingled in the fray of duty, that the brave endure, must have made foes. If you have none, then small is the work you have done. You have hit no traitor on the hip. You have dashed no cup from the perjured lip. You have never made the wrong right. You have been a coward in the fight. Well, Sir M.V. was never a coward in the fight. So in the end, what did Sir M.V. get? 8 long decades of incessant toil, a selfless toil for his countrymen. What did he get in the end? They say this, Sharanara Guna, Maranadali Nodu. When Sir M.V. died, a little shy of his 101st birthday, his last wish was that body should be taken to Muddenhalli, the village, the impoverished village in which he was born, and cremated there without any fuss. Well, this is one wish the nation refused to honor. As Sir M.V.'s news of his death spread, the government of India declared it a national day of mourning, and the state government cabinet met and released a gazette extraordinary condoling his death and ordered state funeral. And as the news spread, there was an outpouring of emotion. It was a curious mixture of pride, admiration, gratitude, and grief, and above all, love for this man. As the cartage left Bangalore somewhere around 10 o'clock, it had to inch its way to Muddenhalli, as thousands of people had lined both sides of the street to pay their last respects, last homage to this great man. And practically at every village, the cartage had to stop so that people could come and pay respects to this man. And finally, it was late in the evening by the time the cartage reached Muddenhalli. In the meantime, the forest department had already set up a pyre there of sandalwood, and the agarbatti manufacturers of Bangalore and Mysore had sent in truckloads of agarbattis for the funeral. As the funeral pyre was lit, fragrance rose from it, and the cool evening breeze carried it towards the imposing Nandi Hills right behind. And Sir M.V. turned into a fragrant memory. We all have gathered here today to savor that fragrance. Thank you